Hello. Okay, so in the Leadership Book Club this month, we reviewed the book Surrounded by Idiots, right? Which is based on, I believe, the insights model of kind of people being put into categories of blue, yellow, green, and red. And that the book kind of talks about understanding people so that you can work more effectively with them. So I have two book clubs. I have the live book club where we meet every month, and then I have the book club that every month there's a recommendation and supports go through, and we work kind of through Voxer every week as opposed to have a live meetup, so that people who are really busy can still be part of something, read books, but also tap into support as and when needed. Anyway, and it's really cost effective and all of that jazz. So the in-person book club, we were discussing the book Surrounded by Idiots. We had some funny stories about, can you read the book in public? Where are you going to use it? Some examples of some participants saying, my child would love to bring that to school and the teachers have a go. I thought it was quite funny. You know, there's a couple of things about the book. We talked about who we would recommend the book to. And I said I would probably recommend the book to people who are really fixed on being right and find it really hard to understand why other people need other things or work other ways. One of the resistance that we had to the book was the oversimplification and also a bit of a pushback on the lack of data. While it's helpful for people to think about what other people value and maybe look for, even in terms of behaviour, it can be helpful. I said that I'd used it with workplaces where if people are assuming negative intent, that it can be helpful to understand the colours and what colour these people might be. And that when you see behaviour that you dislike, it might actually be a signal of distress or unmet needs, and that can be more effective than just assuming that they're being, whatever, I was going to use some swear words, that they're being whatever. And that was grand. One of the things that came up in the group, and I think we don't talk about this enough, is how these types of assessments can be weaponized. And what I mean by that is people do the colours and the purpose is to learn how to work with people more effectively. But what people can start saying is, well, I'm just a red, or I'm just a blue, or that's how it is as a yellow, or whatever. And instead of understanding that that's your default, but that isn't where you should perform, most of us have to be able to perform it across multiple colours, even if it's not our natural style. And I'd even go a step further. The more senior you become as a leader, the more you should be able to work with all four colours. You yourself should be developing those skills where you lack them, as well as leaning on your kind of reliable default. But we were talking about how people can weaponise these things. Instead of using them the way that they're meant to be used, we can start to kind of use them as an excuse for our behaviour. And I think that's one of the things that I notice happens with a lot of workplace, assessments. And I think that it's something for us to think about. When we get new information, do we use it as data to say that I don't need to change or develop or have no responsibility towards others? Or do we use it as data around how we're going to be more effective in the workplace? And I think that sometimes that gets a little mixed up. The other thing I don't like about that kind of approach is that often people will, even though they come in to learn about understanding each other, what can happen is they can decide that their colour is right and other colours are wrong, like their opposite is wrong. And it can indirectly bring a dismissing of the opposite. When I work with teams around this idea of colours, I really, really think about what opportunity you have by developing more competency to work with people across the colours, whether they're your employees, whether they're your clients, your customers, your students, your boss. How can you use this understanding to maybe be more effective in the workplace? So we discussed all of those kind of framings on it. We also had a little discuss about where we sit on psychometric tests, full stop. And I talked about the fact that this test is, the insights is usually requested across loads of organisations. And I think it's because it's everyday language, which can be helpful and it can be understood. But I do worry about when it's weaponised, and that came up quite a bit in the conversation. The other things, because we're looking at it from a kind of a globalised perspective, there wasn't very strong references within the book, and there wasn't a sense that the data was diverse enough because there wasn't really a clear sense of the data. Even though I know it's been replicated again and again, it's replicated as in getting people to identify themselves as one of them. That's not necessarily looking at if they've categorised personality through a particular lens or behavioural personality. So they're kind of some of the critiques. If I was going to recommend this to someone, I would think it's good for anyone who's really stuck on their way of working and thinks that good looks like them. I think it can open that conversation, as long as they don't reinforce the idea that good looks like them and so everyone else should be their colour. So just a kind of a thing to consider. And then we talked a little bit about equity. So it came up in the group, doesn't everyone adapt to the needs of the people that they lead or manage, right? And I was like, no, that's a big issue in leadership, is where a lot of leaders, because they have power, just naturally would prefer if everyone adapted to them. They say to me, why should I adapt to everyone? They should adapt to me. A good leader gets the best out of people, and that means you don't make 20 people do all the adapting. you meet them where they're at and help bring them along. And so this kind of book does get people to think about how to get the best from other people. And I think that that is helpful as long as it's not weaponized or utilized ineffectively. I didn't particularly enjoy reading the book. It seemed to be the kind of shared consensus. There was a bit of a tone around it. Some people talked about feeling it was condescending. I think these things are, that was a sense I had in them. And I don't think there's condescending because somebody knows more. And then there's condescending because someone thinks they know more. And I had a sense in this book that the model is helpful, I think, in some ways. But I think, I do know people are more complex. As a psychometric tester with the British Psychological Society, someone who's been through multiple different tests, myself, in order to train. The simplification is good for workplaces to help people understand things. The book itself, I think, was a bit condescending, as if these were the only 4 ways people present. And while it did show interconnections and intersections, we know that personality psychology and behaviour is much more complex than that. And so it's handy to use, but it needs to be used correctly. So that's our very brief book review. I'll write a piece around it in terms of maybe some of the takeaways that I think from the book itself that are valuable. It's a book that is funny to read in places because it says you're surrounded by idiots, but the book is not about being surrounded by idiots. It's about you stop thinking everyone's an idiot. And that's the tone of the book, is understanding, but I don't think that's always how the book is utilised, and definitely not how I've heard the book or the assessment itself utilised in workplaces. I often hear it weaponised and used to prove somebody is right or valuable. It can also be helpful to think about, if we're trying to explain to people we keep hiring the same type of people, and they try to say, well, no, we're hiring different people, but they're talking about identity, but they're not actually talking about people who work differently. It can be helpful to get people to think about it that way. I thought that was good. We have a really interesting book this month, so I'm not going to announce it now, but I have really good feeling about this book, and so do the book club readers who attend the live sessions, because we've all heard really good things. And yeah, so I'll share that the next time. I'm not going to star it because I think that simplifies book reviews, but I do think that the book is something that we need to have a level of caution around, because it's nearly so simplistic that we can take it as fact and we don't critically think about how it intersects with identity. So like in terms of colours, there was no reference to how identity or equity in the workplace might be relevant. There was no reference to context or systemic patterns. So if you're in an organisation that values one type of colour over another, it's going to be much harder to have differences in the way you work and all of those additional things. So that's my very brief review of the whole thing. I probably wouldn't recommend it to leaders generally, but I would recommend it to people who are quite stuck in seeing the world only through their own point of view. And it might be helpful to see it through other points of view without kind of deciding one's good or bad. All the colours are what I want to see in workplaces. And I think really strong leaders develop the capacity to work with people with all 4 colours, but also the capacity to develop their skills in other colours that they're not naturally or inclined to do. So that's my quick review of Surrounded by Idiots. If you want to join the live book club meetings are closed, they're full, but you can join the monthly subscription, and I'll put the links below. And then each month you get a new recommendation with lots of support materials, cheat sheets, reflective questions, professional development plans, chapter summaries, so that if you don't have a chance to finish it, you can still move on. You're still learning, because not all leaders have time to sit and read the book fully, even the best intentions. So for people that are time poor, the chapter summaries allow you to kind of get the wisdom of the book if you haven't had the full chance to read the book, because it's all about the impact and then you integrating that knowledge. So if you do want to join us, the link's below. Otherwise, have a good day. Thank you for listening. Tell me what you think if you've read the book Surrounded by Idiots. I'd love to hear what you think below.